The wine glass shattered so loudly that the string quartet stopped playing mid-song. For one strange second, nobody in the Napa Valley ballroom moved. Not the senators. Not the Hollywood actors. Not the women in diamond necklaces clutching champagne flutes. Everyone just stared at the elderly man near the entrance as red wine spread across the white marble floor beneath him. His face had gone pale. Terrified pale. And his shaking finger was pointed directly at me. The girl standing beside the catering staff. The girl nobody wanted in the wedding photos. "My God," he whispered. His voice cracked. "She's alive." Before I tell you what happened next, welcome back to Calm Drama Episodes. If you enjoy emotional family revenge stories filled with secrets, betrayal, and shocking twists, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now trust me. What happened that night destroyed one of the wealthiest families in New York forever. The room instantly changed. I can't explain it any other way. One second, it was a billionaire wedding reception filled with fake laughter and camera flashes. The next, it felt like every person in that ballroom had suddenly realized they were standing inside a secret. My oldest sister, Vivian, rushed toward the man so quickly her chair nearly tipped backward. "Mr. Ashford," she laughed nervously, "I think there's been some confusion." "No," the old man interrupted sharply. His eyes never left my face. Specifically the birthmark covering the left side of it. The same mark my family had mocked for 20 years. The same mark they taught me to hide with makeup, hairstyles, lowered eyes, and silence. The old man looked like he'd seen a ghost. And for the first time in my life, my mother looked afraid. Not irritated. Not embarrassed. Afraid. I remember gripping the edge of the catering table because suddenly my knees didn't feel stable anymore. The ballroom had gone completely silent now. Even the photographers stopped moving. Then the old man took one slow step toward me. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out at first. My throat felt tight. "Genevieve," I finally whispered. The man closed his eyes like the answer physically hurt him. Behind him, I noticed my mother grab Vivian's wrist hard enough to make her flinch. That was when I knew. Whatever was happening, my family already understood it. And, somehow, it had something to do with me. But if you had told me 24 hours earlier that one stranger could destroy everything my family spent decades building, I never would have believed you. Because for most of my life, I wasn't the girl people noticed. I was the girl people avoided looking at. Especially in my family. I was 7 years old the first time my sisters called me the cursed one. Not to my face. That would have almost been kinder. I heard it accidentally while hiding beneath the staircase during one of my mother's charity parties in the Hamptons. "You know what the weird part is?" Vivian whispered to one of her friends. "She actually thinks Dad loves her the same." The girls laughed softly. Then my younger sister, Celeste, added, "If I looked like that, I'd never leave my room." I remember staring down at my tiny white shoes while the guests upstairs laughed over piano music and wine glasses. Children remember moments adults think are harmless. That's the dangerous thing about families. They think cruelty disappears because time passes. It doesn't. It settles into you quietly. Like dust. By 12, I stopped volunteering for family photographs. By 15, I learned exactly which angle hid most of the birthmark stretching from my temple to my jaw. By 18, I mastered the art of entering rooms unnoticed. My mother, Evelyn Carrington Blackwood, treated appearances like religion. Everything had to look expensive. Perfect. Controlled. Perfect daughters. Perfect press coverage. Perfect holiday cards. And then there was me. The daughter people stared at too long. Whenever guests visited our estate, my sisters found subtle ways to humiliate me. "Oh, Jen hates pictures." "Careful, her sensitive side is this one." "Don't let her scare the interns." The comments always came wrapped in laughter. That was what made them harder to defend against. Cruelty sounds innocent when rich people say it smiling. But the strangest part was always my father, Alistair Blackwood. real estate titan, political donor, magazine cover billionaire. Whenever my sisters mocked me, he never joined them. Never laughed. Never defended me either. He'd just go quiet. Painfully quiet. Like a man listening to a debt he could never repay. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me during dinners when nobody else noticed. Not with pity. With guilt. And when I was 19, I finally learned why. It happened just after midnight outside my father's private office. I'd gone downstairs for tea when I heard my mother shouting behind the partially closed door. "You should have told her years ago." My father's voice came low and strained. "Not yet. Look what your silence has done to this family." Then came the sentence that changed everything. "You can't hide the truth forever, Alistair." My father died 4 years later in a glass conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. At least that's how the news described it. Real estate mogul Alistair Blackwood passes unexpectedly during Investor Summit. The headlines sounded clean, polished, respectable. Death always looks elegant when wealthy people experience it. But there was nothing elegant about watching my mother fix her lipstick before identifying his body. Nothing elegant about the way my sisters discussed inheritance lawyers before the funeral flowers even arrived. And nothing elegant about the silence that settled over me after the burial. Because deep down, I knew something had died long before my father's heart stopped. The funeral took place at St. Bartholomew's Cathedral in Manhattan. Politicians came. CEOs came. Television reporters stood outside in black coats discussing Alistair Blackwood's legacy. My sisters wore custom designer dresses. My mother wore diamonds. And me? I spent most of the service hiding beneath the brim of a black hat, praying nobody would stare too long at my face. I remember standing near the cathedral entrance after the ceremony while guests approached my family one by one. They hugged Vivian, praised Celeste's strength, told my mother how graceful she looked despite the tragedy. Some people glanced at me politely. Most avoided eye contact entirely. It's strange how quickly people learn your role inside a family. Nobody needs to explain it out loud. They just feel it. And mine had always been obvious. The daughter people tolerated. Not the daughter they claimed proudly. At the reception afterward, held inside our Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park, I overheard one of my mother's friends whisper, "She's still living here?" The other woman lowered her voice. I assumed boarding school or something. Then came the response that made my stomach twist. "No," apparently Alistair insisted. Like I was a burden he refused to abandon. I slipped away before they noticed me listening. That night, after the final guests left and the catering staff cleaned champagne glasses downstairs, I stood alone in my father's office for almost an hour. The room still smelled like his cologne. Leather. Coffee. Old books. For years, this office had terrified me. It felt too important, too controlled. But after his death, it suddenly felt abandoned. Human. I remember touching the edge of his desk carefully, almost expecting him to walk back inside. Then I noticed something strange. A framed photograph sitting near the bookshelf. Me. Not Vivian. Not Celeste. Me. I looked about 10 years old in the picture, sitting on a dock somewhere wrapped in an oversized sweatshirt. My birthmark wasn't covered. I was smiling naturally. Actually smiling. My chest tightened instantly because I didn't remember the last time anyone displayed a photo of me willingly. Especially my father. I picked up the frame slowly. That was when the office door opened behind me. My mother stood there holding a glass of wine. For a second, neither of us spoke. Her eyes drifted toward the photograph in my hands. Something unreadable crossed her face. Not grief. Something colder. "You should get some sleep," she said quietly. I swallowed hard. "Did Dad ever tell you what he meant?" Her expression sharpened immediately. "When?" "The night I heard you arguing. You said he couldn't hide the truth forever." Silence. Heavy silence. Then she walked further into the office and placed her wine glass down carefully. "Your father complicated many things," she said. That wasn't an answer. I tightened my grip on the photo frame. "What truth?" She stared at me for several long seconds. And for one impossible moment, I thought she might finally tell me everything. Instead, she sighed softly. "You always ask the wrong questions, Genevieve." Then she took the photograph from my hands and placed it face down on the desk. I can still remember how small that movement felt. How casual. But families don't realize small moments become permanent memories, especially cruel ones. The next morning, things changed fast. Too fast. Vivian suddenly started attending private meetings with lawyers downstairs. Celeste took over my father's social media tributes and company statements online. My mother began reorganizing the house immediately. By the third day after the funeral, staff members started disappearing. By the fifth, my father's portrait had been removed from the main hallway. And by the seventh, I understood something terrifying. My father had been the only thing standing between me and the rest of my family. Without him there, the house no longer felt tense. It felt hostile. One evening during dinner, Vivian glanced at me across the table and smiled lightly. "You know," she said, "it might finally be time for Genevieve to figure things out on her own." Celeste laughed softly into her wine glass. "What exactly does she even do all day?" Nobody answered. Not even my mother. That silence hurt worse than the insult itself. Because silence becomes permission in families like mine. I quietly lowered my eyes to my plate. And that was when I noticed someone watching me from the far end of the dining room. My father's attorney, Graham Mercer. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't smiling. He looked disturbed, almost nervous. Then, as Vivian continued joking about turning my bedroom into a guest suite, Graham suddenly interrupted. "Miss Blackwood," he said carefully, looking directly at me. "There are certain matters your father intended to discuss with you personally." The room went completely still. And for the first time since the funeral, my sisters looked afraid. Nobody spoke for at least 3 seconds after Graham Mercer said it. The air inside the dining room changed instantly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a glass beginning to crack beneath pressure. Vivian recovered first. She leaned back in her chair with a soft laugh and lifted her wine glass casually. "I'm sure Dad left sentimental little notes for all of us." But her voice sounded tighter now. Controlled. Celeste avoided looking at me entirely. And my mother? She stared directly at Graham with the kind of expression wealthy people use when they're threatening someone without words. Graham cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackwood specifically requested." "Not tonight," my mother interrupted smoothly. Her tone stayed calm, but I noticed the way her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. The attorney hesitated, then nodded once. "Of course." Dinner resumed after that, but nobody relaxed again. Not really. Conversations sounded forced. Silverware clinked too loudly. Even the staff seemed nervous moving around the room. And for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't the only uncomfortable person at the table anymore. That should have felt satisfying. Instead, it terrified me. Because secrets only scare powerful people when those secrets can destroy them. Later that night, I heard raised voices downstairs. I froze outside the upstairs hallway as my mother hissed. "You had no right bringing that up in front of her." Graham answered calmly. "I'm honoring your husband's wishes. My husband is dead." The silence afterward felt dangerous. Then Graham said something that made my stomach tighten instantly. "She deserves the truth." I backed away before they could hear me. But one thought followed me upstairs like a shadow. What truth? The next few weeks became unbearable. My sisters stopped pretending to tolerate me at all. The small humiliations became sharper, crueler, more public. Especially once they realized I had nowhere else to go. One afternoon, Vivian hosted a luxury skincare brand event at the estate for influencers and fashion executives from Manhattan. I stayed upstairs most of the afternoon, but one of the housekeepers eventually knocked on my door. "Miss Vivian wants all family members downstairs for photographs." My chest tightened immediately. Photographs. I almost laughed. For years, my sisters treated cameras like weapons whenever I was involved. Still, refusing would only create another scene. So I went downstairs. The backyard had been transformed into a luxury garden setup filled with white roses, champagne towers, and ring lights. Women in designer dresses posed beside branded displays while photographers moved around capturing content for social media. The second I stepped outside, I saw Celeste notice me. Her smile faded instantly. Oh, just one word, but enough to remind me exactly where I belonged. Vivian walked over wearing a cream-colored designer suit worth more than my car. "We're doing family shots first," she said lightly. Then her eyes drifted toward my face. A pause. Tiny. Cruel. "Maybe stand toward the back?" The photographer awkwardly adjusted his camera strap. I quietly moved where she wanted. Far edge. Partially hidden behind floral arrangements. Like always. As the cameras flashed, I noticed something familiar happening. Everyone instinctively angled themselves slightly away from me. Subtle enough to deny. Obvious enough to feel. People think rejection is always loud. It isn't. Sometimes it's tiny body movements repeated over years until you stop feeling human inside group photos. After the shoot ended, I tried slipping back inside unnoticed. Then I heard laughter behind me. Celeste had grabbed one of the digital preview tablets from the photographer. "Oh my God," she laughed. "You look like you're haunting the background." A few influencers giggled uncomfortably. Vivian smirked. Then Celeste tilted the tablet toward the others dramatically. "Wait, this one's even worse." I felt heat rise into my chest instantly. Not anger. Humiliation. The deep kind. The kind that makes your body feel too visible and invisible at the same time. I turned away quickly before anyone saw my face collapse. But later that night, things became worse. Much worse. Around midnight, my phone started vibrating nonstop on my nightstand. Texts. Notifications. Unknown numbers. Confused, I opened Instagram. Then TikTok. And my stomach dropped. Someone had uploaded a short video clip from the garden party. Me standing awkwardly in the background during the photo session while people laughed. The caption read, "POV, when genetics skip one sibling." The comments were brutal. "Damn, the rich version of the Phantom of the Opera. Why is she standing like a Victorian ghost?" One sister got beauty, the other got a lawsuit. The video already had over 200,000 views. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Then I heard something downstairs. Laughter. Real laughter. Vivian and Celeste were sitting in the downstairs living room watching the comments appear live on the television screen. Reading them out loud. Laughing harder after every new one. I stood halfway down the staircase hidden in darkness while their friends laughed with them. And suddenly I understood something I'd spent years avoiding. My sisters didn't merely dislike me. They enjoyed my humiliation. That realization changed something inside me. Not all at once. Quietly. Dangerously. Because once you realize people enjoy hurting you, you stop hoping they'll become kinder. Then, just before I went back upstairs, I heard Graham Mercer's voice near the front entrance. Cold. Sharp. Unlike I'd ever heard before. "You girls have absolutely no idea what your father protected." 3 days after the video went viral, my younger sister announced her engagement beside a rooftop infinity pool in Miami while drones filmed the proposal from above. By morning, celebrity gossip pages were already reposting clips of it. Tech investor Damian Vale proposes to socialite Celeste Blackwood during luxury yacht weekend. Millions of views. Designer sponsorships. Interview requests. Brand partnerships. My family loved public attention the way some people love oxygen. And suddenly, the entire Blackwood estate transformed into a machine built around one thing. The wedding. Within a week, planners from Los Angeles arrived carrying fabric samples and vineyard layouts across our dining tables. Publicists came next. Then stylists. Then photographers. Then influencer managers discussing live stream contracts over imported coffee in the kitchen. Every room inside the estate became occupied by people prettier, richer, louder, and more polished than the last. Meanwhile, I learned how invisible someone can become inside a crowded house. Nobody officially assigned me a role in the wedding. That would have required acknowledging me publicly. Instead, I became useful quietly, carrying garment bags, organizing floral deliveries, helping exhausted catering staff unload boxes at midnight. The strange part was that nobody directly asked me to help. People just naturally handed me things. Like the house itself had already decided what kind of daughter I was. One afternoon, I spent nearly 2 hours helping a wedding assistant organize guest welcome boxes for arriving VIPs. Custom champagne, monogrammed chocolates, private vineyard tour cards. Everything looked absurdly expensive. As I sealed the final box, I heard laughter drifting from the adjacent sitting room. Vivian, Celeste, and my mother. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But then I heard my name. Well, obviously she can't sit near the stage, Vivian said. Laughter followed immediately. Celeste added, imagine the wedding photos if Genevieve ends up behind us during the vows. More laughter. Then my mother spoke softly. We've already discussed this. She'll stay near the staff entrance during the reception. I froze beside the table. Staff entrance. Like I was temporary labor instead of family. The conversation continued casually after that. Venue lighting, champagne selections, guest security. As if they hadn't just discussed hiding me from public view like damaged furniture. That was the thing about humiliation in wealthy families. It's rarely explosive. It's logistical, quiet, organized. I stared down at the gold ribbon in my hands and suddenly remembered being 14 years old at a charity gala in Manhattan. A photographer had asked for the daughters to pose together. Vivian smiled beautifully. Celeste adjusted her dress. And my mother leaned toward me beforehand and whispered, stand slightly behind your sisters, sweetheart. Sweetheart. Cruel people always soften their knives with gentle words. That night, while everyone else drank wine downstairs discussing floral budgets, I sat alone in my room scrolling through old social media comments from the viral video. I shouldn't have. But humiliation becomes addictive after a while. You keep revisiting it hoping it hurts less the second time. It never does. Then I noticed something strange. A comment near the top had been deleted almost immediately after posting. But someone had screenshotted it first. The account name was hidden, but the comment read, she has the Ashbourne mark. I stared at the screen. Ashbourne? I had never heard that name before. Before I could think further, headlights swept across my bedroom ceiling from outside. I moved toward the window carefully. Another black SUV had arrived at the estate. Third one this week. 2 men in dark suits stepped out carrying briefcases before disappearing through the side entrance near my father's old office. No security announcement. No greeting staff. Nothing normal about it. A knot tightened slowly in my stomach. Something was happening behind closed doors. Something connected to me. I felt it now. The next morning, the atmosphere inside the mansion felt even stranger. Tense. Controlled. People lowered their voices whenever I entered rooms. Staff avoided eye contact. Even Vivian seemed distracted during breakfast. Then Graham Mercer arrived unexpectedly. The moment he entered the dining room, my mother stood immediately. Annoyed. What are you doing here this early? I need access to Alistair's office. Her jaw tightened. That can wait. No, Graham answered calmly. It can't. The room went still. I noticed Celeste glance nervously toward Vivian. Tiny reaction. Easy to miss. But fear changes people's faces faster than anger does. Graham finally noticed me sitting quietly near the far end of the table. His expression softened instantly. Miss Blackwood, he said carefully, how are you holding up? Before I could answer, Vivian laughed lightly. She's surviving. Miraculously. Nobody laughed this time. Not even Celeste. Graham stared at my sisters for several long seconds before speaking again. You know, he said quietly, your father spent most of his life trying to protect one person in this family. The silence afterward felt heavy enough to crush glass. My mother stood abruptly. That's enough. But Graham ignored her. His eyes shifted toward me. And for the first time since my father died, I saw genuine sympathy in someone's face. Not pity. Sympathy. There are things you deserve to know, he said carefully. My heartbeat quickened instantly. Vivian spoke fast now. Sharp. Defensive. She doesn't need to hear old family drama right before the wedding. Graham's expression darkened. This was never about the wedding. Then he reached into his briefcase slowly and placed a sealed ivory envelope onto the dining table. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting. Genevieve. The room froze. Even my mother looked shaken. I stared at the envelope without breathing. Then I noticed something worse. Vivian looked terrified. Nobody touched the envelope for several seconds. It sat in the center of the breakfast table beside silver coffee trays and half-finished fruit plates like it carried something radioactive inside. My name stared back at me in my father's handwriting. Genevieve. Not Jen. Not sweetheart. Not kiddo. Genevieve. Formal. Intentional. Final. I slowly looked up from the envelope and immediately noticed something unsettling. Nobody else at the table looked surprised it existed. Not really. Nervous? Yes. Angry? Definitely. But not surprised. Which meant one thing. They already knew about it. Vivian recovered first. Of course she did. She leaned back in her chair and forced out a soft laugh. Oh my God, Graham. You're acting like Dad left behind state secrets. Nobody joined her laughter. Graham Mercer kept one hand resting lightly on the envelope. She deserves to receive this privately. My mother's jaw tightened. That won't be necessary. The attorney looked directly at her. With respect, Evelyn, your husband's instructions were extremely clear. The room went silent again. I could hear silverware clinking faintly in the kitchen somewhere down the hall. A catering assistant laughing nervously downstairs. Tiny normal sounds floating through a room that no longer felt normal at all. My eyes drifted back to the envelope. My father's handwriting suddenly made my chest ache in a way I wasn't prepared for. Because despite everything, despite his silence, despite his weakness, a part of me had always believed he loved me. Not loudly, not bravely, but genuinely. And now he was speaking to me from beyond the grave while the rest of my family looked terrified. That realization unsettled me more than the envelope itself. Finally, I reached forward slowly. The second my fingers touched the paper, Celeste stood abruptly from her chair. Seriously? She snapped. Everyone looked at her. Even she seemed startled by her own reaction. She quickly forced a smile afterward. I just think this is dramatic timing right before the wedding. Dramatic timing. Interesting choice of words. Graham's expression hardened slightly. Your father requested she receive it immediately if anything happened to him. Something cold slid through my stomach. If anything happened to him. Not after his passing. Not eventually. If anything happened. Like he expected danger. Or feared it. My mother stood next. This conversation is over. But before she could move toward the table, Graham calmly slid the envelope directly into my hands. Open it somewhere safe, he said quietly. Safe. The word echoed strangely in my head. Because suddenly, for the first time in my life, the Blackwood estate didn't feel safe at all. Not for me. I left the dining room without another word. But halfway upstairs, I heard Vivian hiss something sharply behind me. Why would he leave it to her? I stopped walking instantly. Then my mother answered softly. Because your father never learned when to let go of guilt. Guilt. That word again. Always guilt. Never shame. Never regret. Guilt. I locked my bedroom door the second I got upstairs. Then I stared at the envelope for nearly 5 minutes without opening it. Fear does strange things to curiosity. Part of me desperately wanted answers. Another part feared the answers might destroy whatever remained of my life. Finally, I slid my finger beneath the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. And one old photograph. My breath caught immediately. The photograph showed my father standing beside an older silver-haired man near a private jet. Both looked younger. The man wore military attire. But that wasn't what froze me. It was the little girl standing between them. Me, maybe 6 years old. the birthmark on my face fully visible. My father rested one hand protectively on my shoulder while the older man stared down at me with an expression I couldn't understand. Not affection. Not exactly. Something deeper. Something emotional. My hands trembled as I turned the photograph over. Written on the back in my father's handwriting were 6 words. One day, he will find you. A chill moved through me instantly. Who? Before I could process it further, I unfolded the letter. But instead of answers, there were only 3 short sentences. If you are reading this, events are already in motion. Trust Graham Mercer. And whatever happens at the wedding, stay visible. I read the final sentence 3 separate times. Stay visible. The irony almost made me laugh. My entire life had been built around disappearing. Avoiding cameras. Avoiding attention. Avoiding humiliation. And now my dead father's final instruction was telling me the opposite. A sudden knock at my bedroom door nearly made me jump. Genevieve. Vivian. I stayed silent. Her voice softened unnaturally. We should talk. That alone terrified me more than her insults ever had. Because manipulative people only become gentle when they're afraid of losing control. I slowly opened the door halfway. Vivian stood outside, still dressed perfectly despite the early hour, but her smile looked strained now. Can I come in? No. For a brief second, irritation flashed across her face. Then the polished mask returned. You're overthinking whatever Dad left you. Then why are you nervous? The question landed harder than I expected. Her eyes narrowed slightly. I'm not nervous. You look terrified. Silence. Heavy silence. Then she lowered her voice carefully. You don't understand the kind of people connected to our family. My heartbeat slowed strangely. What does that mean? Vivian glanced down the hallway before answering. It means some things were hidden for a reason. Not denied. Hidden. That mattered. I stared at her carefully now. Really stared. And suddenly I noticed something I'd never seen before. Vivian wasn't trying to protect herself. She was trying to control damage. That realization changed everything. Before I could ask another question, footsteps echoed upstairs. My mother approaching. Vivian immediately straightened. Her mask snapped back into place instantly. We'll talk later, she whispered quickly. Then she walked away before my mother rounded the corner. I closed my bedroom door again slowly. But this time, instead of fear, something else settled inside me. Suspicion. Because people don't panic over meaningless secrets. And they definitely don't spend 20 years making one girl feel worthless unless they need her to believe it too. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I walked quietly downstairs toward my father's old office. The mansion was dark except for faint light spilling beneath the office door. Someone was inside. I moved closer silently. Then I heard my mother's voice. Cold. Precise. If she finds out before Saturday, everything collapses. My pulse spiked instantly. Then came Celeste's voice. We should have destroyed the files years ago. Files. Plural. A third voice answered next. Vivian. Panicked. What if Graham already told her? Silence followed. Then my mother spoke again. Quietly. Dangerously. Then we make sure she never reaches that wedding. I didn't sleep at all after overhearing them in my father's office. I stayed sitting on my bedroom floor until sunrise with the letter spread across my knees and one terrifying sentence repeating in my head. Then we make sure she never reaches that wedding. At first, I tried convincing myself I misunderstood. Maybe they meant emotionally. Socially. Maybe they just wanted me gone before the ceremony. But deep down, I knew better. Fear has a texture when it's real. And for the first time in my life, my family sounded afraid of me. Not embarrassed by me. Afraid. That changed everything. By morning, the Blackwood estate looked beautiful again. Perfectly beautiful. Sunlight poured across marble floors. Fresh white roses arrived by the thousands for the wedding. Chefs moved through the kitchen preparing tasting menus for celebrity guests flying into Napa Valley. And downstairs, my sisters laughed over espresso with wedding stylists like nothing had happened. That was the disturbing thing about wealthy people. They could discuss ruining someone's life at midnight, then debate flower arrangements by breakfast. I watched them quietly from the upstairs balcony for several minutes before returning to my room unnoticed. Or at least I thought unnoticed. When I opened my bedroom door, I froze instantly. Someone had been inside. My dresser drawers were partially open. Closet doors shifted. My vanity items disturbed slightly. Tiny changes. Easy to dismiss. But people who grow up emotionally unsafe become experts at noticing when something moves half an inch. My pulse quickened immediately. I crossed the room fast and dropped to my knees beside the mattress. Still there. The photograph and my father's letter remained hidden exactly where I'd placed them underneath the bed frame. I exhaled shakily. Then stopped. No, not exactly where I left them. The photograph sat slightly crooked now. Someone had touched it. Cold spread slowly through my chest. They searched my room. The realization made me suddenly aware of every hidden camera, every hallway shadow, every security guard outside the estate. For years, I thought I was the powerless person inside this family. Now I wasn't sure anymore. Because powerful people don't panic unless they're protecting something enormous. Around noon, Graham Mercer arrived unexpectedly again. This time, my mother refused to let him inside. I watched the argument unfold through the upstairs hallway window overlooking the front entrance. "You're making this worse," my mother hissed sharply. Graham stood completely calm. "No," he answered. "Your husband made it worse when you waited too long." My stomach tightened instantly. Waited too long for what? My mother lowered her voice afterward, but I still caught one sentence clearly. "If Theodore discovers she's alive before we control this." Alive. Again. The same word from the wedding mystery. The same word from the old man in my father's photograph. She's alive. Not, she exists. Not, she's here. Alive. Like someone once believed I was dead. I stepped back from the window slowly. Suddenly my entire childhood started replaying differently inside my head. Moments I never questioned before now felt strange. Wrong. I remembered private security following me during family vacations when I was little. I remembered my father refusing to let tabloids publish close-up photographs of me. I remembered changing schools unexpectedly 3 times before age 11. I remembered strange men occasionally visiting my father late at night while my mother stayed furious for days afterward. At the time, I thought rich families were simply paranoid. Now I wasn't sure anything about my life had been normal at all. That evening, I finally forced myself to do something I'd avoided for years. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror without makeup. Without carefully angled hair. Without trying to hide the birthmark. For a long time, I simply stared at my own reflection. The mark stretched darkly across the left side of my face exactly the way my sisters always mocked. The family curse. Phantom face. Halloween. But suddenly, for the first time, I wondered if they hated it because it represented something. Not ugliness. Identity. A memory. Proof. That thought unsettled me so badly I stepped away from the mirror immediately. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My heart pounded as I answered cautiously. "Hello." Silence at first. Then Graham Mercer's voice. "You can't stay in that house alone tonight." Fear tightened instantly in my chest. What's happening? I can't explain safely over the phone. Then explain unsafely. A pause. Then he sighed softly. "Your father spent 20 years protecting you from people far more dangerous than your sisters." The room felt suddenly airless. "What people?" "I need you to listen carefully," Graham continued. "Whatever happens, you must attend that wedding in Napa." "Why?" Another pause. Then quietly. "Because someone there has been searching for you for a very long time." My grip tightened around the phone. Searching for me? None of this made sense anymore. "Graham, who am I?" Silence. Not hesitation. Pain. Then he answered carefully. "You are the reason your father lived the last 20 years afraid." Before I could respond, another voice suddenly echoed downstairs. "Vivian." "Genevieve." I turned toward my bedroom door instantly. Who are you talking to? Graham's voice sharpened immediately. Do not tell them we spoke. The line disconnected. My pulse hammered violently now. Vivian knocked again. Louder this time. Open the door. I quickly shoved the phone beneath a pillow and opened the bedroom cautiously. Vivian stood there wearing silk loungewear and an expression too calm to trust. Behind her, two unfamiliar men in dark suits walked down the hallway carrying boxes from my father's office. I recognized one immediately. He was one of the men arriving nightly in the black SUVs. Vivian noticed me staring. They're helping organize legal documents. Lie. I knew it instantly. Because one of the boxes carried a label partially torn open across the side. And, through the gap, I saw the words. Ashbourne Holdings. My breath caught. The same name from the deleted social media comment. Vivian followed my eyes. And for the first time in my entire life, I watched my sister lose control completely. Her face drained white. Then she slammed the box shut so fast the man carrying it nearly stumbled. Neither of us spoke. But in that moment, I finally understood one thing clearly. The birthmark wasn't the real reason my family hated me. I was connected to something they'd spent 20 years trying to bury. The wedding took place at a private vineyard hidden deep within Napa Valley hills where people like my family went to pretend wealth made them elegant instead of cruel. Every inch of the property looked engineered for social media. White floral arches curved above rows of imported Italian chairs. Crystal chandeliers hung from transparent reception tents beneath the California sunset. Luxury fashion influencers filmed Get Ready With Me videos near fountains while political donors sipped champagne beside fire pits overlooking the vineyards. Everything glittered. Everything smiled. Everything lied. By noon, black SUVs and luxury cars lined the entrance road for nearly half a mile. Security guards checked guest lists through earpieces. Private chefs moved through outdoor kitchens preparing custom tasting menus. A string quartet rehearsed beside olive trees wrapped in white lights. And somewhere inside all that perfection, I felt like prey. The second we arrived, my mother pulled me aside near the reception entrance. Her smile stayed perfectly composed for nearby photographers. But her voice turned razor-sharp the moment nobody else could hear. You will stay out of sight tonight. I stared at her calmly. Why? Her jaw tightened instantly. Because for once in your life, I need you to stop making things harder. Interesting. Not. Embarrassing. Not. Ruining appearances. Harder. Like my presence itself complicated something dangerous. Before I could answer, Vivian approached holding her phone while livestream comments flooded across the screen. Oh good, she said lightly. The seating issue's fixed. What seating issue? I asked. She smiled without warmth. We moved you beside the catering entrance. Less overwhelming for everyone. Less overwhelming. As though my face disrupted the emotional stability of wealthy strangers drinking $600 champagne. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I simply nodded. And that unsettled them more. I could tell. Because people expect humiliation to break you visibly. When it doesn't, they get nervous. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of white roses, violin music, and fake tears. Celeste walked down the aisle in a custom Vera Wang gown while drones filmed overhead for the wedding livestream. Guests applauded. Damien Vale smiled like a man marrying a luxury brand instead of a person. And through it all, I noticed something strange. My family barely looked at the ceremony. They kept watching the entrance. Especially my mother. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted toward the vineyard gates like she was waiting for someone she desperately hoped wouldn't arrive. Even Vivian kept checking her phone nervously between smiles. Fear changes rich people in subtle ways. They become too polished, too controlled, like actors trying not to forget their lines. After the ceremony, guests moved toward the reception pavilion overlooking the vineyards. Golden sunset light poured through the glass walls while waiters carried trays of champagne beneath hanging chandeliers. A jazz band played softly near the dance floor. Somewhere nearby, influencers debated camera angles. I stayed exactly where my family wanted me, near the back. close to the catering entrance. Invisible. Or at least I tried to be. Because the strange thing about spending your entire life hiding is eventually you become very good at observing. And tonight? Everyone looked nervous. Not normal wedding nervous. Terrified nervous. Graham Mercer arrived late to the reception carrying a leather document case against his chest. The second my mother spotted him, color drained from her face. Vivian intercepted him immediately near the entrance. I couldn't hear the full conversation from across the ballroom, but I caught fragments. You promised. Not here. Too many people. Then Graham answered something that made Vivian step backward instantly. You should have told her the truth years ago. There it was again. The truth. Always circling me. Never reaching me. About an hour later, while guests gathered for speeches, I slipped briefly outside onto the vineyard terrace to breathe. The California air felt cold against my skin. Inside, laughter echoed through the ballroom. Outside, everything felt unnaturally quiet. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned sharply. Graham Mercer stood near the terrace doorway. For the first time since my father died, he looked exhausted. Not professional. Not controlled. Just tired. You came, he said softly. You told me to. His eyes drifted briefly toward the birthmark on my face. Not with discomfort. Recognition. Your father would have wanted that. I crossed my arms tightly. Stop speaking in riddles. He looked toward the vineyard hills before answering. Alistair loved you more than anyone in that house. Pain moved quietly through me at the sentence. Because love without protection eventually starts feeling like abandonment. Then why did he let them destroy me? Graham's face tightened. Because he believed keeping you hidden kept you alive. Alive. Again that word. I stepped closer now. Who am I? Before he could answer, headlights suddenly swept across the distant vineyard road below. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Black SUVs. The same ones from the estate. Music continued inside. Guests kept laughing. But near the entrance, security guards instantly straightened. My mother appeared beside the ballroom doors seconds later. The moment she saw the convoy approaching, panic flashed openly across her face. Not fear of scandal. Fear of recognition. Vivian rushed beside her. Oh my God. The SUVs stopped near the reception entrance one by one. Doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out first. Then finally, an elderly silver-haired man emerged slowly from the center vehicle. Tall despite his age. Elegant. Powerful. The kind of man whose presence changed rooms before he even spoke. The entire reception atmosphere shifted instantly. Politicians began whispering. Executives straightened their jackets. Even Damien Vale looked stunned. I heard someone near the bar whisper. That's Theodore Ashbourne. Ashbourne. My pulse stumbled violently. The same name from the online comment. The boxes. The photograph. The old man from my father's picture. Theodore Ashbourne entered the ballroom surrounded by security. And the second he crossed the doorway, everything stopped. His eyes moved slowly across the reception. Searching. Desperate. Then suddenly, they landed on me. Time froze. I watched the color drain completely from his face. His wine glass slipped from his hand and exploded against the marble floor. The music stopped instantly. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Theodore Ashbourne stared directly at me with visible shock trembling across his face. Then, barely above a whisper, he spoke words that turned my entire family pale. My God. His voice cracked. She's alive. Nobody moved after Theodore Ashbourne spoke. The entire ballroom stood frozen beneath crystal chandeliers and hanging white roses while wine spread slowly across the marble floor beside his polished shoes. She's alive. The words echoed through the silence like something sacred had been broken open. My pulse hammered violently in my ears. Alive. Again. Always alive. Not beautiful. Not cursed. Not disfigured. Alive. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. Everyone important in that room understood the meaning except me. My mother recovered first. Of course she did. She rushed forward with a brittle smile stretched tightly across her face. "Theodore," she said quickly, "this really isn't the time." But he ignored her completely. His eyes never left me. Not my sisters. Not the bride. Me. The room's attention shifted with his. I could physically feel people turning toward me now. The invisible daughter suddenly standing at the center of the most powerful gaze in the room. Theodore Ashbourne took another slow step forward. Up close, he looked older than the man from the photograph. Older. Tired. But his eyes carried the same expression. Shock tangled with grief. "What is your name?" he asked softly. My throat tightened. "Genevieve." The reaction hit him instantly. Like pain. Real pain. He closed his eyes briefly before whispering, "That's not the name they gave you." The ballroom erupted into confused murmurs immediately. I stopped breathing. "What?" My mother's face turned pale. Vivian stepped forward immediately. "Mr. Ashbourne, I think there's some misunderstanding." "You stay quiet," Theodore snapped. The force in his voice stunned everyone silent again. Even Vivian froze. Theodore looked back at me slowly. And for the first time in my life, I saw someone stare at my birthmark without disgust, without pity, without discomfort. He looked at it like recognition. "Come here," he whispered. I didn't move. Couldn't move. My mind felt disconnected from my body entirely. Then Graham Mercer appeared beside Theodore carrying the leather document case against his chest. The second my mother saw it, genuine fear crossed her face. "No," she said sharply. "Don't do this here." But Graham ignored her. Instead, he looked directly at me. "Genevieve," he said carefully, "your father wanted the truth revealed publicly if anything ever happened to him." My heartbeat became painful now. Publicly. That word mattered. Because whatever this secret was, it was powerful enough that my father feared what would happen if it stayed hidden. Theodore Ashbourne extended a trembling hand toward me. "You deserve to know who you are." "Who you are?" Not "what happened?" "Who you are." The room blurred around me for a second. I heard whispers spreading rapidly among guests now. Phones lowering. Conversations stopping. Even the influencers filming near the dance floor had gone silent. Nobody cared about the wedding anymore. Only me. Only the secret. Only the family trying desperately not to collapse in front of everyone watching. My mother's voice suddenly sharpened. "Genevieve, do not walk over there." And something inside me finally broke. Not loudly. Quietly. 20 years of humiliation. 20 years of hiding. 20 years of shrinking myself to survive people who wanted me invisible. And now they were terrified of me learning why. I looked directly at my mother for the first time in years without lowering my eyes. "Why?" The question landed harder than shouting ever could have. Her expression cracked slightly. Tiny fracture. But enough. "Because," she said carefully, "none of this changes what we've done for you." Done for me. I almost laughed. Before I could answer, Theodore spoke again. "You stole her." The room exploded into chaos. Voices everywhere. Confused whispers. Damien Vale stepped away from Celeste entirely now, staring between everyone like he'd wandered into the wrong movie. Vivian turned white. And Celeste? For the first time in her entire life, my sister looked small. Theodore Ashbourne's voice trembled with controlled fury. "My daughter's plane disappeared 23 years ago over the Atlantic." Every sound inside the ballroom disappeared again. My chest stopped moving. "No. No. No. That child," Theodore continued, pointing toward me carefully, "was declared dead alongside her mother." I felt physically numb now. Graham Mercer slowly opened the leather document case. Inside were photographs, legal papers, DNA reports. My mother lunged forward instantly, but security intercepted her before she reached him. The guests gasped loudly, not because she was stopped. Because powerful people only panic publicly when the truth is catastrophic. Graham handed Theodore a single document. Then Theodore looked at me with tears filling his eyes. Her name was Anastasia Ashbourne. My knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of a nearby chair to stay standing. Anastasia. Not Genevieve. Anastasia. Theodore continued speaking softly now. Like every word physically hurt him. Your mother, Eleanor Ashbourne, survived the crash briefly. I couldn't breathe. The ballroom no longer felt real. She contacted one person before she died. His eyes shifted toward my mother. Evelyn. The entire room turned toward her instantly. My mother looked trapped now. Cornered. Exposed. Theodore's voice hardened. Eleanor begged Evelyn to protect you until I could reach Europe. A horrible silence followed. Then Graham Mercer quietly finished the sentence for him. But by the time Theodore arrived, he looked directly at my mother. She claimed the child had died from injuries. My stomach twisted violently. No. 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 Then Graham placed another document into my shaking hands. Adoption records. Hospital records. DNA confirmation. Every page carried signatures. Dates. Proof. Proof my entire life had been built from theft. I looked up slowly at my mother. The woman who spent 20 years teaching me to feel ugly. Ashamed. Worthless. And suddenly I understood why. Because if I stayed broken, I'd never ask questions. The realization hit so hard it physically hurt. Tears blurred my vision instantly. Why? I whispered. My mother said nothing. So Theodore answered instead. Because after the crash, your father discovered Eleanor had named you sole heir to the Ashbourne estate. Murmurs exploded through the ballroom again. Billions. The Ashbourne family controlled shipping, private defense contracts, international real estate. One of the wealthiest dynasties in America. And suddenly every cruel moment of my childhood rearranged itself into something monstrous. The schools. The secrecy. The photographs. The shame. The insults. They weren't trying to punish me for being ugly. They were trying to erase who I really was. Vivian suddenly stepped forward crying now. We were children. Stop, I said quietly. My voice shocked even me. Calm. Cold. The ballroom fell silent instantly. I looked at my sisters slowly. At some point I whispered, you knew. Neither answered. Because they couldn't. And silence becomes confession eventually. Celeste started crying harder. We thought protecting the family mattered. You uploaded videos of me crying. Her face collapsed completely. The room watched everything now. Every billionaire. Every politician. Every socialite. Watching the perfect Blackwood family rot publicly from the inside. Then Theodore stepped closer carefully. And for the first time in my life, someone touched my face gently. Not trying to hide the birthmark. Not avoiding it. Understanding it. His thumb trembled against my cheek. She had the same mark, he whispered. My chest shattered. Because suddenly the thing my family taught me to hate most about myself was the final proof my mother never truly disappeared. Nobody looked at the bride anymore. Celeste still stood near the center of the ballroom in her custom wedding gown, but the reception had stopped being about her nearly 20 minutes ago. Now the entire room revolved around me. Or maybe not me. The truth. That was the strange thing about secrets. The moment they finally surface, people stop seeing the person and start staring at the damage. Conversations exploded across the ballroom in frantic whispers. Phones appeared discreetly beneath tables. Politicians stepped away from cameras. Guests who once fought for invitations suddenly looked desperate not to be photographed anywhere near the Blackwoods. Social death moves fast in wealthy circles. Faster than love. Faster than loyalty. Sometimes even faster than money. My mother stood perfectly still near the center of the room while people stared at her with growing horror. For years, Evelyn Blackwood controlled every room she entered. Tonight, she looked like someone watching her empire burn in slow motion. Theodore Ashbourne remained beside me quietly. Not forcing anything. Not overwhelming me. Just there. Steady. Protective. A feeling so unfamiliar it almost hurt. Meanwhile, Graham Mercer continued laying documents across one of the reception tables, while several guests leaned closer trying to understand the scandal unfolding in front of them. DNA reports. Private correspondence. Hospital transfer records. One document carried my mother's signature approving temporary guardianship after the plane crash. Temporary, not permanent. The room noticed that too. I watched Vivian reading the papers from across the ballroom, her face draining more with every page. Finally, she looked toward my mother. "You told us she was adopted." Her voice sounded thin now. Young, almost frightened. My mother didn't answer. Celeste stepped forward next, mascara beginning to streak beneath her eyes. "You said Theodore abandoned her." Still silence. That silence changed something inside the room. Because suddenly my sisters no longer looked cruel. They looked manipulated. Not innocent. Never innocent. But smaller. Human. I realized then that lies poison everyone eventually, even the people helping maintain them. Theodore spoke quietly beside me. "Your father wasn't innocent either." I turned toward him slowly. Pain crossed his face. Alistair discovered the truth years later and tried convincing Evelyn to tell me. The guilt. Finally explained. He stayed because he believed leaving would place you in danger. Danger from what? Before I could ask, my mother finally spoke. Cold. Controlled. "You have no idea what Eleanor asked me to do." The ballroom fell silent again immediately. My mother's eyes moved toward me for the first time all evening. "She begged me to protect you from Theodore's family." Theodore's expression darkened instantly. "That's a lie." "No," my mother answered sharply. "Your father's business enemies were already investigating the inheritance before the crash." A flicker of something passed through Theodore's face then. Not denial. Recognition. My pulse quickened. My mother stepped forward now, years of control slipping into desperation. "You think I wanted this life?" she snapped. "You think raising another woman's child while hiding international investigations was easy? Another woman's child." The phrase hit harder than she intended. Because even now, even exposed, even cornered, she still couldn't fully claim me. Theodore's voice hardened. "You emotionally destroyed her." My mother looked directly at him. "I kept her alive." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Complicated. That was what made the moment feel real. Nobody inside that ballroom could fully decide whether my mother was a monster, or a woman who became monstrous while surviving fear. That ambiguity settled over the room like smoke. Then Vivian suddenly looked at me. Actually looked at me. Not through me. Not around me. At me. Her voice cracked slightly. "Did you really think we hated you because of your face?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. Yes. The honesty landed brutally. Celeste started crying openly now. We were kids. I looked at her quietly. "You filmed me crying for entertainment." Her face collapsed completely. No defense left. No clever response. Just shame. And somehow that felt more satisfying than anger ever could have. Because humiliation finally looked unfamiliar on them. For years, they handed it to me casually. Now they were choking on it themselves. The ballroom doors suddenly opened again as additional Blackwood legal advisors rushed inside whispering urgently to my mother. I caught fragments immediately. Press already reporting. Social media exploding. Ashbourne attorneys requesting injunctions. The wedding was over. Not officially. But spiritually. No amount of flowers or violin music could survive what happened in that ballroom. Damien Vale slowly removed his wedding ring beside Celeste. The movement was small. Quiet. But devastating. Celeste noticed instantly. "Damien." He didn't answer. That silence broke her harder than anything else tonight. Interesting how people finally understand pain once it arrives personally. Theodore leaned closer toward me afterward. "You don't need to stay here." But I wasn't ready to leave yet. Because for the first time in my life, nobody in that room could make me invisible again. I slowly stepped toward the center of the ballroom. Toward my family. The crowd parted immediately. Watching. Waiting. My mother's eyes followed me carefully now. Cautiously. Like she no longer understood who I was. Truth changes power dynamics fast. I stopped directly in front of her. For years, I imagined screaming during this moment. crying, breaking. But when it finally happened, I just felt tired. You know the strangest part? I said softly. Nobody moved. I spent 20 years believing something was wrong with my face. My voice remained calm, steady. But every person who taught me to hate myself already knew the truth. My sisters lowered their eyes immediately. I continued quietly. You made me feel disgusting because you were afraid I'd start asking questions. My mother swallowed hard. For the first time in my life, she looked uncertain around me. Not powerful, not composed, just uncertain. Then I said the thing I think everyone in that ballroom will remember forever. When people spend years trying to make you feel small. I looked slowly around the room. It usually means they're terrified of what happens if you finally stand up. Nobody spoke afterward. Not even the reporters gathering near the entrance. Because some truths silence rooms completely. Then I turned toward my sisters one last time. Vivian looked shattered. Celeste couldn't stop crying. And suddenly I realized something unexpected. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate requires emotional attachment. What I felt instead was distance. The kind that forms after surviving something too long. Theodore gently placed his hand against my back. A quiet offer. Not pressure. Family shouldn't feel unfamiliar. But to me it did. As we began walking toward the ballroom exit, my mother suddenly spoke behind me. Genevieve. I stopped. Not because of guilt. Habit. Slowly, I turned back toward her. Her eyes looked wet now. Small. Almost frightened. Then she whispered the one sentence I never thought I'd hear from her. We did love you. The room waited for my answer. But some wounds become too deep for simple apologies. So I looked at the woman who raised me to disappear. And answered honestly. You loved me most when I stayed hidden. The internet called it the Blackwood wedding collapse before sunrise. By morning, clips from the reception had spread everywhere. Theodore Ashbourne dropping the wine glass. My mother's panic. Guests whispering behind champagne towers. And finally, me, standing in the center of the ballroom while the truth destroyed 20 years of lies in less than 20 minutes. News outlets replayed the footage for days. Social media dissected every expression frame by frame. Some people defended my mother. Some called her evil. Some blamed my sisters. Others blamed my father for staying silent. The comments became exactly what wealthy families fear most. Public judgment. But strangely, I stopped reading them after the first day. Because for the first time in my life, strangers no longer defined how I saw myself. 3 weeks later, I visited my mother alone. Not at the Hamptons estate. That property was already tangled in lawsuits and media investigations. She had moved temporarily into a quiet penthouse overlooking the Upper East Side. Smaller. Colder. Lonelier. The woman who once controlled charity galas and political fundraisers now answered her own front door without staff beside her. Funny how quickly power disappears once perception changes. She looked older when she opened the door. Not physically. Emotionally. We sat across from each other near the windows while Manhattan traffic glowed below us. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then finally, she looked at me carefully. You have Eleanor's eyes, she whispered. Not Genevieve's. Not Anastasia's. Eleanor's. My real mother. The woman I would never remember. I stared quietly at the untouched tea between us. Did you ever hate me? I asked. The question seemed to hurt her. No, she answered immediately. Then softer. I hated what your existence reminded us of. Truth. Guilt. Fear. Loss. I understood that now. Not enough to erase the damage. But enough to stop carrying it like poison inside me. When I left the penthouse that afternoon, paparazzi waited outside near the sidewalk. Cameras lifted instantly. Questions exploded toward me. Genevieve, are you changing your name? Will you reclaim the Ashbourne inheritance? Do you forgive your family? For years, cameras made me feel hunted. Ashamed. Small. But this time, I didn't lower my face. I didn't hide the birthmark. I didn't step behind anyone else. I simply looked forward. Then walked through the crowd without answering. Because some people spend their whole lives trying to be seen, and others spend their whole lives surviving being erased. I had already done both. And, for the first time, I finally understood something my family never did. The mark on my face was never the thing that made me different. It was the proof that I survived them. And that's where Genevieve's story ends. Not with revenge. Not with screaming. Not with becoming the kind of person they were. But with finally understanding that the thing they mocked her for most was never something to be ashamed of. Sometimes the people who try hardest to make you feel invisible are the same people terrified of your true worth. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments. Do you think Genevieve should ever forgive her family? And if you enjoy emotional revenge stories like this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.